31st of August 1913, Sackville Street, Dublin. Liam knew that he shouldn't be here. It was no place for a 10-year-old boy. Any adult would tell you that. But he hadn't asked an adult. He just sneaked into town without anybody knowing. Because really, he had to be here. Today's meeting in the city's main street was too exciting to miss, and he looked forward to telling his friend Nora all about his adventures later on. Last night, Liam had heard his mother saying that the police had banned Jim Larkin, the leader of the city's striking workers, from addressing the people of Dublin. But Larkin had insisted that he would appear in Sackville Street at 1:30 today, police or no police. Liam had no idea how Larkin was going to do it, and neither, it seemed, did anybody else, but the street was thronged with people, eager to see what would happen. Even though he was fairly tall for a 10-year-old, Liam found it hard to see across Sackville Street as he stood at the base of Nelson's Pillar, the high column topped by a statue of Lord Nelson that Ma said was the exact centre of Dublin. The thought of his mother made him feel guilty. She'd be worried if she knew he was here alone and surrounded by grown-ups. And there was a funny mood in the crowd, a slightly frightening sense that something, anything, could suddenly happen. But things that were frightening were sometimes exciting too, and Liam told himself that what his mother didn't know needn't worry her, and that if his hero, Mr. Larkin, wasn't afraid, then he wouldn't be either. There were hundreds of policemen on duty, and as Liam moved down the street towards the General Post Office, he noticed how angry some of them seemed, fingering their batons and looking suspiciously at the people who spilled off the footpaths and onto the street. The crowd itself was an odd mixture, with Larkin supporters, mostly working men in their caps and Sunday best jackets, mingling with well-dressed people coming from Mass in the nearby Pro-Cathedral. Liam checked the time on the big clock mounted on the wall above a nearby shop. It was 29 minutes past 1. Only 1 minute to go, and still no sign of Jim Larkin. It would be really disappointing if he didn't show up. Yet, with policemen stationed at every corner, it was hard to see how the leader of the striking workers could keep his promise. But he always kept his promises, Liam's father had said last night. You could count on it. Thinking of his father, Liam glanced around nervously. As a loyal supporter of Larkin, Dad was bound to be somewhere in the crowd, and Liam would be in serious trouble with him if he was spotted here. He would have loved to come into town today with him, but there was no question of his father bringing his son to a meeting banned by the police. "Make way there, make way!" cried a big police sergeant, and Liam was jostled forward as a line of police officers pushed the crowd back to allow a carriage to draw up outside the Imperial Hotel, directly across the road from the General Post Office. Through a gap in the crowd, Liam watched as a bearded elderly man and an expensively dressed woman emerged from the carriage and made for the hotel entrance. Liam felt a surge of annoyance. Why should everyone else be pushed out of the way just because somebody rich wanted to enter the hotel? It wasn't that he had anything against the lady or the man, whom he now saw was stooped and slow-moving, but why did the police have to be so rough with everybody else? Daz said that the police were completely on the side of the employers, so pushing the ordinary people back was a way of showing them who was boss. Liam felt a tap on his shoulder. "You shouldn't be here, sonny," said a voice in a strong country accent. Liam looked up to see a tall policeman looking down at him. "Be off home with you now," said the man gruffly. Part of Liam wanted to say, "Dublin is my home," but it wouldn't be a good idea to give cheek to a policeman. He hesitated, reluctant to argue back, but not wanting to give in at once. "Well, what are you waiting for?" "Jim Larkin," answered Liam, the smart answer slipping out before he could stop himself. The policeman's face darkened. "Don't give me lip, you little pup." The man took a step nearer and Liam drew back. There was a sudden roar from the crowd. "Larkin! It's Larkin!" They began cheering wildly and pointing to a balcony on the first floor of the Imperial Hotel. To Liam's relief, the policeman turned away and began pushing his way towards the hotel. Liam stood on tiptoe to see the figure on the balcony. It couldn't be, but it was. The elderly gentleman who had walked so shakily from the carriage was now standing erect and proud. It was Jim Larkin. "Workers of Dublin, I said I'd be here, and here I am." The crowd went mad, and Liam found himself cheering loudly along with the people around him. There was a sudden surge as the police converged on the hotel, and Liam knew it wouldn't be long before Larkin was arrested. Sure enough, before Larkin could say much more, he was pulled back off the balcony. But the briefness of the appearance didn't matter to Liam or to the people in the street. Their hero had outfoxed his enemies once again, and coolly kept his promise to appear, right under their noses. Liam ran forward, wanting to see Larkin in the flesh as he was led away. The police behind him surged forward too, but were stopped by the police, who had formed the cordon around the hotel. Standing as close to the line of policemen as he dared, his heart pounding, Liam saw a flurry of activity at the door of the Imperial. Then an officer in command of a group of uniformed policemen bundled Larkin out the door and towards a carriage. Before Liam knew what he was doing, he called out, "Well done, Mr. Larkin!" The tall union leader, still wearing the false beard that had been part of his disguise, turned his head towards the voice. Locking eyes briefly with Liam, he winked and then was thrust into the carriage. Winked at by Jim Larkin. Liam could hardly believe it. Wouldn't that be something to tell Da, if he dared? As the carriage pulled away, scuffling broke out on the roadway near the hotel entrance. There was a cry of "baton charge," and within seconds there was chaos. The policemen who had earlier been fingering their batons now suddenly wielded them savagely. People screamed in pain, and men fell to the ground, blood streaming from their heads and faces. Liam felt his stomach tighten in fear, and he tried to run in the opposite direction, but he was forced back by the crowd behind him, who were being battened by police officers advancing from the direction of Nelson's Pillar. Turning on his heel, Liam ran as best he could down the middle of the road, dodging the bodies of those who had already fallen. He couldn't believe that the police were attacking everyone in sight, but something had been unleashed today, and nobody was safe, not even a boy like himself. As if to prove it, a nearby policeman, having just felled a middle-aged man with a sickening blow from his baton, swung round and flailed at Liam. Dodging from an attack that might have split his head, Liam still caught part of the blow on his shoulder, and he cried out in pain. Before the man could swing again, Liam ducked in panic under his outstretched arm and ran on down the street. Soon he was near the turn for Sackville Place, where he attended choir practice with Nora 2 nights a week. There was a laneway that ran off Sackville Place and parallel to Marlborough Street. If he could just make it to there, maybe he could escape from the horror of the riot. He ran to the corner of Sackville Place and turned into it, then stopped dead. Mounted policemen were advancing towards him, reaching down from their saddles and felling anyone within range of their batons. Liam turned and fled, the cries of those being pursued by the horsemen ringing in his ears. Sackville Street was now like a battlefield, but Liam didn't hesitate and ran diagonally across the broad thoroughfare, heading for Princes Street and the alley at its far end that would take him to Middle Abbey Street and safety. Lots of other people were running in the same direction, and he couldn't see clearly what lay ahead. Suddenly the crowd halted in disarray. Liam heard the order, "Reserves, advance!" and the people in front of him milled about, trying to reverse direction as the reserve body of police officers was unleashed. Really frightened now, Liam hesitated, not knowing what to do. People all around them began to be hit, trapped as they were in front and rear. Liam crouched and raised his arms to try to protect his head. A heavy hand spun him round, then a baton crashed into his temple. For a split second he saw a blinding light. Then he fell to the ground, and everything faded to darkness.